Pasuk Chavav. The Pasuk says, "Vayelchu vayavo." They went and they returned. They came to Moshe and Aaron. So Rashi cites the Midrash. Mal vayechul. I was speaking that they returned. What does it tell us? The going. Lakish halichosnu biosom. To equate the going to the coming, to the returning. Ma biosom beisaro. Just as when they returned, they came back with this negative intent. On the going, when they went with this sinister intent, with this negative intent. As they returned with this negative lens, they went with that same negative lens. So the question we discussed was, who chose these people? Hashem. And to refer to Anoshim, and Rashi, who Anoshim? Tzadikim. So if they originally went there with tzaddikim, how could the Torah tell us that when they returned with this negative perspective, with this evil intent? They'd gone with the same intent when they went. So over here, the Orach Chaim we mentioned yesterday. Just want to read it inside. He says, that since the intent of those who sent him was negative, we're speaking with the people, so that negative intent of the one who's sending the agent impacts the agent negatively. As a result of the concept of shluch shalom kamoso, the agent has the same status as the one who sends the agent. As a result of that connection between the agent and who he represents, the negative intent of the one who appoints the agent affects and impacts the agent himself. And it creates this negative tendency of predilection, which didn't exist prior to this connection between the shliach and the one who had sent him. Now this is the point. As we find that a person is a shliach mitzvah, it creates a status of kedusha because of the linkage between the shliach and what he's going for that agency. When a person goes for an agency of kedusha, of mitzvah, it somehow touches the agent to be sanctified. As a result of it, although initially they were tzaddikim when they were chosen, but before they actually linked to the ones they were representing, but when they began this journey to scatter the land, where they were representing each of the tribes for this fact-finding mission, as a result of this, they had this plot between them, to come back with this negative interest, with this negative report. So I'd once said, the Gemara has a question in the Dorim when if a person makes a neder that someone is not permitted to benefit from him, so the person is not permitted to benefit. It's Torah violation. If I say I will not benefit from Ruvain, from his assets, from his actions, to have any benefit, I'm not permitted to benefit from him. What about, so the Gemara discusses a case, person is a Kohen, and a Yisrael says, I will not benefit from the Kohen, not have any benefit from him. Now that person has to bring a korban. So the only one who could officiate is the Kohen, and the only Kohen that's officiating, this Kohen, which he made the neder, the vow that he's not going to benefit from him. Is the Kohen permitted to officiate on behalf of the person who made the neder that he will not have any benefit from the Kohen. So Gemara is questioning Nedarim. What's the question? When the Kohen officiates, is he shlucha didan? Is he the agent of the Yisrael, or the one who's bringing the Kohen, the korban on his behalf? So if he's his agent, as a result of that, he's a direct beneficiary of what? Of the service of his agent, because the agent is representing the one who is bringing the korban on his behalf. Or do we say no? In reality, the Kohen is shlucha d'rachmana. He's God's agent. God instructed him that you must bring the korban. It happens to be the korban of this individual. So since the individual who's having the benefit of the atonement, of the kapora, is only a by the way, it's not direct. There's not that direct linkage between the one who's doing the action. You're just a side beneficiary of that. But in terms of who you act on whose behalf, you're acting on behalf of Hashem, not on behalf of the person whose korban you're bringing, therefore he's permitted to benefit. So that's the question. Is it shluchi d'rachmana? Is the Kohen the agent of Rachmana, meaning the merciful one, God, or shluchi didan, or is the shliach of our shliach, meaning the person who's bringing the korban? And that would be the halachic difference, whether this Kohen is permitted to officiate on behalf of the one who made the neder that he can't benefit from him. The Gemara leaves it unresolved. The Gemara tries to cite a brisa, and it's not able to bring proof. However, the conclusion is that it's shlucha d'rachmana. Why? Because the Gemara says in Kedushin that a person cannot act as an agent on behalf of the person if that person who he's representing cannot act in that capacity. So since the Yisrael cannot officiate, or the Levi cannot bring the korban, only the Kohen can. So it's not, you are the equivalent of the one who appoint you to be the agent, because the person who instructed him is not qualified to do the avoda. Automatically, as a result of that, we must say that the Kohen is shlucha d'rachmana, that he's God's agent. He's not the agent of the one he's bringing the korban on his behalf, and therefore the one who made the neder is permitted to have this Kohen to officiate on his behalf because he's shlucha d'rachmana. That's the Ran in Adorim, and that's Tosas in Kedushin. That's the reason why it's permitted. So I had mentioned, we find by the mitzvah, the binyan of Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, when Klal Yisrael are instructed to build the Mishkan, if you look at the Psukim, Klal Yisrael were never told directly they should build the Mishkan. The one who was told to build the Mishkan was Moshe Rabbeinu. And then Moshe had instructed them exactly how to do it. But the obligation, the mitzvah was to Moshe. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, but if all Klal Yisrael were involved, why was it said directly to Moshe, not to all of them? So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh explains that Hashem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu should be the beneficiary, that every aspect of the Mishkan should be attributed to him. As a result of that, the mitzvah is to him, and he's delegating it to all the Jews that they should act on his behalf to be his shliach. And based on the principle of shlich shel kamoso, he is the beneficiary of all their actions. That's how Orach Chaim HaKadosh learns why the instruction was to Moshe, and then Moshe delegated to all the Jews to be involved in Lechsa Mishawi. It's interesting. Now the Medrash that it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was not directly involved. He did not participate in the building of the Mishkan. He only participated in the raising of the Mishkan. It doesn't mean to say he wasn't a beneficiary of the mitzvah. The mitzvah, he benefited, because every Jew who acted on his behalf. He, according to Orach Chaim, was his agent. As a result of that, mitzvah-wise, it's a credit to him. But the actual involvement, he was not directly involved. So why was he down on this one? He was like disappointed that he couldn't do it himself. So that you have to say, the Gemara says in Kedushin that mitzvah bo yosem b'shlucho, that if a person is able to do a mitzvah himself or delegate it through a shliach, through an agent, it has greater value if the person is involved himself. Because one is like arm's length, although it's accredited to the one who appointed that person. But in terms of the actual participation, it has another level of value when the person participates himself in the mitzvah. That's mitzvah bo yosem b'shlucho. So Moshe Rabbeinu thought he'd be able to participate directly in the building of the Mishkan, but since they all did it themselves, that's why he was disappointed that he didn't have the opportunity to be directly involved. But credit-wise, the building of the Mishkan, every aspect of the Mishkan, according to the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh, is attributed to him based on the principle of Shluchus Shel Odom Kamoso. They were his agents. That's what the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh explains over there. The why was directly to Moshe, and Moshe delegated through all the Jews. That's the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh. I wanted to say, based on what we're saying over here, that we say whenever there's a linkage between the agent and one who appoints him, the status of the one who appoints him impacts and affects the agent because there's this linkage between the agent and the one who's representing. And the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh says over here, just as we say it in the negative, as what happened with the Raglim, we also say it in the positive. When you're going to do a mitzvah, the person is imbued with a kedusha because he's a shliach of mitzvah. So because of that linkage to that, the kedusha already impacts on that person, but before he engages to do the mitzvah, he has no relevance to that kedusha. So he's imbued with kedusha, so the mitzvah immediately, already it's another level. That's the Ohr HaChaim HaKodesh over here. So what I wanted to say was this. We'd said many times that the Mishkan itself was a microcosm of creation, if you remember. And it wasn't just building a physical edifice. Building of the Mishkan was that every aspect of Mishkan had to be infused with a kavanah, with an intent, that that particular part of the Mishkan was one aspect of creation. And that's why the Gemara says in Brochos that Betzalel, who oversaw the building of the Mishkan, he was Yodea L'Tzarif Osius. He knew exactly how to conjugate the letters of the Aleph Beis, through which creation came about. So he knew exactly how to infuse every part of the Mishkan with the intent, which corresponded to creation. As a result of that, the Mishkan itself was a microcosm of creation, and that's what we explained why the Lamates Malachos are learned from the Mishkan, because every one of those creative activities which were about the Mishkan, those creative activities correspond to the energies through which Hashem created the world. That's how we explained it. We had said that Moshe Rabbeinu was Niskasha Melechsa Menorah. Moshe Rabbeinu had difficulty making the menorah, so we explained it wasn't the physical form of the menorah, but the intent for the menorah to be effective, which represents Torah Sheba'al Peh, since the intent is something which is unlimited, it's infinite because it's Chochmas Hashem, it represents it's God's wisdom, that's Torah Sheba'al Peh. Therefore, the only one who could infuse the menorah with that intent was only Hashem himself. And therefore, that was the Niskasha Moshe Melech HaMenorah. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's difficulty. So what I wanted to say was this. If Hashem would have directly given the mitzvah of the building Mishkan directly to them, and they themselves are not Moshe's representatives, each one independently has the mitzvah. As a result of that, whatever level that person's at, he merits that level of understanding to be able to infuse the Mishkan with that certain intent of Kedusha, to have that level of function, to activate the various forces which are the equivalent of existence. But what happens if every person who participated in building a Mishkan was linked to Moshe Rabbeinu? Who was Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu was Shokol Connected Israel. His neshama was the equivalent of the whole Jewish people in their entirety. So it comes out every Jew who participated in the Mishkan, because of his linkage to Moshe, who Moshe Rabbeinu was the equivalent of all Klal Yisrael, they merited the Siyata D'Shmaya, they merited a level of Kedusha which had a semblance of Moshe Rabbeinu, because these people are not acting as independent people, but rather they're acting because they're linked to Moshe Rabbeinu. So firstly, as a result of that, who built the Mishkan? It's the equivalent of Klal Yisrael. Every aspect of the Mishkan was built by Klal Yisrael, because Moshe Rabbeinu was the equivalent of Klal Yisrael. In addition, because of Moshe being that linkage to Moshe Rabbeinu, what level of understanding were they imbued with to merit that special level of Siyata D'Shmaya? It was the most advanced level because of that connection to Moshe. They merited that more advanced level of understanding, and therefore they were able to infuse it with a new understanding which they wouldn't have merited on their own. So it's only because of that linkage. So since Hashem wanted that the Mishkan should be at this ultimate level, firstly, it should be done through Klal Yisrael, every bit of it, every part, because Moshe is Klal Yisrael. And in addition, the intent, which they'll merit, which in their own right, they're not at that level to merit that level of intent. Now that the link to Moshe Rabbeinu, now they merit that special level of intent. So this is the positive side. Based on the principle, the Rechaim HaKodesh says over here that shluch shalom kamosa, that when you linked, the person merits a kedusha because you're representing that certain dimension of whatever that may be. So what I said was, as I said, the Gemara in Kedushin in the Durham has a question. The Kohen, is he shlucha d'rachmana or is he shlucha d'dam? The Kohen, is he God's shliach or is he the shliach of the one who brings the korban? If he's shlucha d'rachmana, even though the person made a neder or the Kohen made a neder that this person cannot benefit from his action, he's permitted to officiate, to bring that person's korban. Because whose agent is he? He's Hashem's agent. But if he's the agent of the person, he cannot. The conclusion is, as I said, the Ran cites Tosas, shluch d'rachmana. Because you could all be an agent in the area, in the capacity which you could be. So this area, the Meshaleach, the person you represent, cannot officiate. Therefore, we must say the Kohen is shluch d'rachmana. So I said something interesting. You know, we find in Pirkei Avos, it says that a person does something l'shem for the tzibur, and he does it l'shem shamayim. He does it for the sake of Hashem. He merits that schus avosam nisayosam. Not only is he able to draw from his own merit to succeed in that agency, in that action, but he's able to draw on the schus of the tzibur. Schus at tzibur misayosam. The schus of all the people of the community assist him to succeed in that mitzvah. And although he couldn't have succeeded on his own, it was only because it was a combined merit of the whole community, he receives full credit. Hashem accredits the success of that mitzvah to that one person, although in his own right, he wouldn't be able to succeed. But because he did it l'shem shamayim, for the sake of Hashem, so Hashem allows that all the merit of that community should contribute to his action to be able to succeed. That's the mission Pirkei Avos. So what I said was, if we're saying when you're a shaliach and you represent someone, that linkage creates a certain level of kedusha or negative, and you're imbued with another level, as we said, Klaus representing Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's say you live your life a shlucha d'rachmana. Whatever I do, I'm God's agent. Why do I exist? Why do I function? Whatever I do for the sake of Hashem. As the Rambam cites the pasuk, Kopol Hashem l'maneus, pasuk in Mishlei. Whatever I do on behalf of God. I eat for Hashem, I sleep for Hashem, I study for Hashem, I work for Hashem. Everything is only a medium, only a means to an end. What's the end? I do it all for God's glory. As a result of that, if you're shlucha d'rachmana and Hashem is infinite, at what level siyata d'shmai do you merit? So based on the degree of representation of Hashem, is it me or is it him? And if it's me, it's partially him and mostly me, or it's all him and it's not me. That degree of siyata d'shmai, that will determine the siyata d'shmai you merit whenever you do the action. So Moshe Rabbeinu was nachnu mo. Moshe Rabbeinu was negated to Hashem. There wasn't a trace of himself. Everything was purely for the sake of Hashem. That was his level of humility. As a result of that, what level of siyata d'shmai did Moshe merit? He merited the ultimate. There was no blockage. There was no separation of him and Hashem. As a result of that, he was imbued with that level, and therefore Chazal tell us when Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Klal Yisrael, Shechina medaberes b'toch grono. It's like the Shechina spoke through his throat. He was just a conduit for Hashem. Because being the agent, everything goes through the agent. But the question of who's the agent? Since Moshe Rabbeinu was fully negated to Hashem, as a result of that, it was a full flow of Hashem through Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore he merited the ultimate level of to be the conveyor of the word of Hashem for that reason.
So my
God, Mark,
is there some level of collectivism to the sin of the spies, or were the tribes of Yeshua and Kalev disproportionately positively benefiting from their positive report?
When the 12 spies came back and 10 had negative reports, it says all the people bemoaned their fate and they cried, which indicates including the tribe of Yeshua and the tribe of Kalev. They all bought into the 10, not what Yeshua and Kolovit said. Now, if the connection to the people actually denied them their ability to make a choice because they are representatives, they're not held culpable. They're not culpable. They're victims of the people, and they have no control to see it other than the way they did see it. The answer is, even in that context, they still had choice. They chose to see it as the people saw it. But they still, I'm not saying it wasn't a monumental choice to make, or almost very difficult to make, but it was within their capacity to make that choice. Yeshua and Kalev, they were a different dimension of people. They were the most special Jews of Klal Yisrael because of who they were, despite what their tribes were, because all the Klal Yisrael had this lack of faith, and that's why they bought into the 10. They were able to meet the challenge, and they saw it correctly as they should see it. This is not a ploy, but rather this is a confirmation that Hashem's with us, and all that we saw was only, as we explained, to distract them, that they should not notice us when we scat out the land. You know, again, as we said, if something's beyond the person's capacity, it's not a test. It's a test only because you have the ability to withstand that test, to meet the challenge. They all had the ability to meet the challenge. Because of who they were, they chose not to be. They failed. Because the Kalev and Yeshua, who they were, who were the most special, therefore they were able to meet the challenge. But it was within all their capacity to meet the challenge. But it's only the way they chose.
Rabbi?
Nothing superfluous in the Torah. It mentions all the names, and then after mentioning all the names, it says Eilu Shmos Anoshim Asher Sholach Moshe Losas Oretz, Pasuk Tezayin. And these are the names of the people who Moshe had sent to scout out the land. And we just mentioned, what do we have to repeat again? These are the names. So we have, the Baal Turim says, Eilu Shmos Anoshim, Gematria Shmoseim B'chuorim. Numerically, it's the words, their names are mechuorim, are despicable. Getting back to what we're speaking about. At the beginning, when these names are mentioned, the Medrash tells us, take a look at the Medrash Tanchuma, and I mentioned the Gemara about Rameir, the Rameir, when he would go to any location, when he heard a name, he's able, through the name, to understand exactly what that person is. If he's dishonest, if he's honest, exactly what his status is. The names over here forebode that all these people, their core was evil. They themselves had a negative. As a result of that, they came back with these negative reports. And therefore it says, Eila Noshim, Shmosei Mechumorim. The names are Mechur. Mechur means like something which is despicable, something which is detestable. That's what they are. That's why it repeats it. The names, and you understand what these names represent, this negative representation. And as a result of that, that's why they chose as they chose. Because they themselves had this certain core. So when you link it with who they represent, with the Orach Chaim, it activated that core, which is that negative.
Right.
That's
So they had a spiritual deficit from their names in the beginning. Even though they were leaders, there's a Gemara in Sota that goes through